He has done his DM from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. He has a professional experience in the Indian Army and has served in the Indian Army for more than 26 years. And he has been posted as a medical officer at Leh Ladakh, Military Hospital Agra, Military Hospital Pune, Research and Referral Hospital New Delhi, Command Hospital Chandimandir, and now is presently posted at Air Force Hospital New Delhi. He has 20 publications in international and national journals to his credit, and he has, to his credit, commendations from the Army Commander, Western Command, and Chief of Army Staff for his par excellence contribution in the field of intervention cardiology. Apart from being an eminent interventional cardiologist with the Indian Army, Colonel Navreet Singh holds a private pilot's license and is very passionate about flying. He has won several gold medals in athletics during his college days at AFMC Pune and also during his service with the Indian Army. The list of his achievements and accolades is really long, and if I go on, we will have very little and less time for his session, which has been planned with so much difficulty, as he is really busy with his intervention and his academic work. So it was very difficult to get to him to deliver this lecture. I'm really thankful to you, Colonel Navreet, for taking out time and being kind enough in this hour of need, hour of crisis, to be here with us. And Punjab University feels really honored to have you as such a distinguished and eminent interventional cardiologist and speaker for today. I welcome you.
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you, Vice Chancellor Sir, and the other faculty for giving this opportunity. It's a real honor. Without wasting time, I'm given the topic to speak on cardiac disease prevention in this pandemic of COVID-19. And I would like to just speak for about 4 or 5 minutes as to the basic way we can address this cardiac prevention. Cardiac disease and its risk factors and COVID-19 should be considered as separate entities, but when they come together, they form a much more complicated picture. Considering this, we can have 4 subsets. One, patients or people who don't have any risk factors of heart disease and don't have the COVID-19, that's the best group. Then you have patients who have no risk factors. They're absolutely hale and hearty, doing well, and they have unfortunately contacted the virus. The third group would be patients who have risk factors and have not contacted. And the fourth, which is the most sinister, would be those who have these risk factors of heart disease, have heart disease, and unfortunately come in contact with the virus and get infected. So those who have no risk factors, and these risk factors I would like to enumerate are in age more than 65 years, diabetics, hypertensives, patients having known heart disease, heart failure, renal disease, renal failure, or strokes, cancer patients, or those patients who are on immunosuppressive therapy. Those are the risk factors. So those who don't have these, well, you're going to fare very well. You don't have any disease. Just continue with a wonderful lifestyle of good nutrition, good sleep, exercise, and remain healthy. If these patients who don't have these risk factors go on to unfortunately contact a disease, the virus, they have about a 20% chance of having some cardiac manifestation because of the virus. The virus itself has the ability to cause some cardiac damage, whether it's in form of heart attacks, heart failures, or any rhythm disorders. That means the heart rhythm goes bad. So it happens in about 20%. The third subgroup, which is the patients or the people who have heart disease, who have these risk factors, and they don't have the infection, well, prevent the infection with all the means we know, but more important than not, continue your medication as a schedule. Many reports coming in that one type of antihypertensive should not be taken, this drug should not be taken. Now, this is substantiated. So just continue with your normal medication, take prevention, and try to be as free from this infection. However, and of an unfortunate infection, they form the major high-risk group where significant heart disease and also may even succumb to the illness. And this is the subset which all over the world is causing the major number of deaths. In this subgroup is what we need to be careful of, because we have relations, we have our own cells taking heart medicines, we have relations old who have other diseases, and so what do we do in their case? As of now, the guidelines all over the world, especially our guidelines, which are very formidable. I think the ICMR has done a fabulous job of making very good guidelines, that we need not give these people any specific care to prevent the COVID infection. And what it brings us to is there something that we can have to prevent this infection, which on most occasions, besides the routine social distancing, hand washing, and good sanitation, is the bedrock, is the tablet chloroquine. A lot of controversy all over the world. The WHO has said that it need not be given, but as of today, the guidelines, the ICMR guidelines, Indian Council guidelines are very clear in saying that it should be given in a certain subset. And that subset are the ones who are at exceptionally high risk of contacting this infection. Now, which is that group? So it does not say that you should give it to high-risk patients, but you must give it to patients who are at high risk of contacting the infection. So that is the healthcare workers, healthcare providers, surveillance workers. They have now included policemen, they've included security personnel, they've included relatives giving care to COVID patients, but it is just that subset. So the basic way to prevent cardiac disease from either flaring up or occurring de novo is continue your routine medications, continue your routine lifestyle, and of course, stay away from this infection. I'm ready to answer any questions if they are there.
Anybody has
Hello?
any specific question related to cardiac intervention or cardiac care, can unmute yourself and ask the questions. And Colonel Navreet, I would just like to know that what is the age group, like right from childhood, what is the minimum age group for which the children need to start taking cardiac precautions?
I think it's wonderful to say that we need to educate absolutely everyone right from childhood, because the cardiac complications of cholesterol deposition begin immediately after birth. So they continue, and you have various subsets which are high risk, whether it's high family risk because of a high risk family subset, or because of your dietary habits, which is absolutely taken overwhelmed a major part of our younger age group. But it should happen right from infancy and childhood. What is important is that in this COVID crisis, children are relatively well protected from the complications of this virus. They do form a subset which is less at risk. They take the infection much well. They have an innate immunity which is much stronger. And they do not show the features of this illness so badly. That is in context with COVID. But if a patient doesn't have any risk factors and doesn't have any heart disease and has a COVID infection, few of them, 1 in 5, would have some or the other cardiac ailment. And that is coming more and more to the front line. I mean, you may have heard of people saying they recovered from COVID, but the day he was being discharged, he had a heart attack and died, or he recovered from COVID well, but went into heart failure. So those are the things which are now surfacing. A few reports from China, now coming in from Italy, where heart failure, rhythm disorders, heart attacks are slightly more common in this absolutely hale and hearty individuals, no risk factors, but because of the infection, they can have some cardiac symptoms. That's one in 5 or 20% at best.
Thank you, Colonel Navreet. There's another question for you. Sir, the death rate for COVID-19 patients with heart disease was 10.5%. Do you think that mortality rate is higher than expected or less?
So the way we document death is by saying the case fatality rate. And the case fatality rate is patients who are infected, how many of them will die. The case fatality rate for COVID with a mark of some amount of lung involvement is about 2.3%. That means about 100, about 2.3, or that's what 3 patients will succumb to this illness. So that's the benchmark of the way we measure. That's the case fatality rate. Now, patients who have diabetes, just pure diabetes, this goes up to about 8%. Patients who have hypertension, this goes up to about 6 to 10%. The patients who have known heart disease with heart failure, it goes up to about 12 to 14%. Those who have a conglomerate of all these, like quite a few of our patients have hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, then this goes up much further, and you have to bench up to almost 18 to 20%. And almost 60% of the people who died, 60 to 70% of the people who died from COVID had one or the other or more of these complicating factors. So they certainly do add up to cause morbidity and mortality. And the best way is to have excellent good control of your blood pressure. Don't stop your blood pressure medicines. Don't stop your antidiabetics. Don't stop your blood thinners, especially because COVID does cause some amount of blood thickening and blood clotting. So continue with your medication absolutely as per schedule. The case fatality rate, as I said, is about 10 to 12% if only one risk factor is there, and it keeps adding up. Thank
you, Colonel Navreet. There's another question which I feel, do you think women are more prone to getting infected during COVID? They're more likely to suffer heart problems during COVID because of this infection? Or is it men? Or it does not matter?
There is no data to suggest that somebody is more susceptible to develop cardiac symptoms with this infection. But yes, the general age of having cardiac symptoms is more or later in women. So they tend to fare better in the age profile vis-a-vis the men. But there's nothing to suggest that women are more going to be affected more with COVID, or they're going to have more heart failure when they have COVID. It's not been shown that way at all. Medications wise, the prophylaxis is a very work, and therefore should only be restricted to people who are at high risk of contacting the infection, not at high risk group of the general population. So it is the one which is likely to be more contact infection much more. That's healthcare workers or people who interaction. Maybe over time we may get wiser and start giving it to shopkeepers or teachers. But it's still not yet in the guidelines.
Another question I have is obesity a reason for contracting heart diseases in children?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's obesity in children is a very important risk factor, not only for heart disease, but so many other illnesses associated with which further contribute to heart disease. They develop early onset diabetes, they can have lung disease, they have so many endocrinal conditions, they can have endocrinal disorders because of the obesity, causing more of and more severe heart disease. Obesity can cause such reduction in the oxygenation that these children may need some devices for giving them a better oxygen supply to their lungs, so that they don't develop other diseases like hypertension in a young child. Young children will develop hypertension. They'll develop so many more endocrinal disorders, growth disturbances, besides, of course, the mental illnesses which are associated. Obesity is a very, very big risk factor for so many things in a child.
Thank you. So there's another question for you. As drugs like HCQ and remdesivir are produced in large quantity, even though not proven by efficacy for treating COVID-19, do you think that such a mass production of such drugs is morally right, as this can lead to false hopes in patients that are infected or are prone to infection, such as healthcare workers, etc.?
Very correct. I think all the guidelines always say one thing, and that is that when you're prescribing these drugs, you must underline the fact that it is not that you are absolutely protected or resolved of any infection that can happen. So there should be no complacency in the other known and accepted and confirmed methods of prevention of infection. So whether it is distancing, whether it's washing hands and sanitizing your hands, it is absolutely not a replacement, and no complacency should set in. Having said that, we don't have too much in our hands by way of prevention. So, by way of prevention, active prevention, by medication. And in today's world, we always want some weapon system in our hand that we can actually stay away. So the only drug which really has got some potential benefit, at least in studies outside the body, which was done in India too, and they show that the virus does it does get killed by this or does not reproduce that fast, is chloroquine. And there are not case-controlled studies. You don't have randomized controlled trials, but there are few studies which do protect that yes, we could have a certain benefit. A short study from All India Institute, which has been quoted by ICMR, that it does. As far as the treatment goes, chloroquine in the treatment again is probably just adjuvant or anecdotal, but it's just one of the few drugs that we have. And coming to remdesivir, well, difficult to get, very expensive. It does shorten or telescope the period where the virus is being spread. How much of saving of life can happen? Again, not so great, controversial. As I said, when you have nothing in your hands, something is better than nothing, and that's why probably they are still being accepted as methods. but no control trial, no actual randomized trial which says, yes, this is clear-cut, real good benefit for chloroquine or remdesivir. Amount of money that we're spending, we should have a sufficient stock, considering that we may have a spike in cases, and we may change our policies for prophylaxis, for protection, for prevention, till we don't get a vaccine for this. So I suppose we should have that contingency measure. I mean, it's a part and parcel of planning for the government. How much should be kept, or what are the financial ramifications? I would probably leave it to the government to think about it.
There's another question. Some of the medication utilized to treat COVID-19 also have potential cardiac complications. Is it true, sir? And what kind of complications can be endured if we use these medications?
Yes. The most important medicine in context of our country and the way we're using it is chloroquine. It was first an anti-malarial and then used for various other diseases like joint diseases, rheumatoid illnesses. So we have a little bit of experience in using it. It has its own side effects. The cardiac ones have been touted the most, wherein you could have, in a very small proportion, serious cardiac arrhythmias. There could be some association of some heart muscle involvement. But I think the commonest ones are nausea. You take the first tablet and you have nausea, and some amount of vomiting can happen. I, for myself, did not have any nausea, though on previous occasions when I've taken chloroquine, I did have nausea. But this time around, it didn't happen. But it can cause some nausea, some abdominal discomfort. But otherwise, a relatively safe medicine. But cardiac complications are well known, well documented, and one of the reasons why it should not just be given carte blanche to everyone in the society. It's not something like iodine magnesium to salt, it should be given to all, or vitamin A that should be given to all. It needs to be selectively given, and patients to be screened. The risk benefit to be assessed before we prescribe this. As far as remdesivir and the others, well, they also have cardiac side effects, cardiac interactions, drug interactions with other cardiac disease. We hardly use it. I don't think it's really so much of a for us as of now. I think chloroquine is the major one, and it's a safe drug. It has a few side effects. The risk benefits need to be considered, and if the patient is exposed to high risk environments, I think it's a fair call for the prophylaxis, as has been said. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, my mic is muted. My question is that there's a question from Avtar Singh Chimali. He has written, heart failure was reported in 37% of COVID-19 patients, according to a medical journal. What kind of cardiac rehab we can use to avoid such?
So the cardiac failure, as I said, can occur in two settings. One can be the direct effect of the virus in a patient who doesn't have any heart disease. Otherwise, the patient was absolutely normal, had no illnesses, but he contracted infection. The virus hit his heart also, like the way it hit his lungs. It hit his heart also and caused the heart muscle to weaken and go into some failure. That is one subset. The other subset is that patient had known heart disease. He was a known case of heart disease, and then he contracted this infection. And because he was slightly at risk, he tipped into heart failure. So he was already at the watershed And then because this infection happened, the load on the body was so high, the virus itself was affecting, and he just tipped into heart failure. For those patients who have predominant heart disease in the past, well, you can augment their medications a little bit, increase drugs for heart failure, support them, and in most states would benefit. It is the subset which is hit by the virus first time, by the virus alone, which doesn't offer us too many options by way of directly treating this. You just treat it like normal heart failure or a normal rhythm disorder or a normal heart attack. In fact, many patients of COVID who had features suggestive of a heart attack, chest pain exactly like a heart attack, were taken heart failure, yes, does happen. And as I said, those people who have already some amount of heart disease, we can augment their medication and do a fairly good job. But in the patients who have de novo, that is instant, because of the virus itself, it becomes a tough call. And many people who have succumbed to this illness, who have died because of this, have had this hit on the heart also. And that is why they fare much badly. But there is no one drug which I can give to COVID patients with heart disease and say, okay, this disease will treat you of your heart disease. No, not one single drug like that.
Thank you, Colonel Naveed. There's one question which is coming to my mind. Since everybody is saying, and even WHO is claiming that there is going to be no actual drug or there will be no cure for about 2 years for coronavirus, and what special precaution do you think diabetics and the heart patients should take? Because life is not possible without going out, without interacting with people. So what is that special care which they need to take, people who are already on heart medication or are diabetics?
Okay, besides the normal routine, good healthy lifestyle, which all of us know, I think that need not be reiterated. What is important is that as of now, there is no special medication which a patient of heart disease is taking, whether it's ecosprin or for blood thinning or beta blockers like metoprolol for reducing the heart rate, heart failure, or ACE inhibitors, antihypertensives, which need to be stopped or altered in dosage or regime or increased just to prevent any damage. So many articles have come on the use of drugs like telmisartan, losartan, which are antihypertensive drugs, that they may increase the chances of the virus getting into the lungs, but it has not been proved, and it is not at all advised to stop these medications. So I think the most essential method to prevent any high-risk group having worse outcomes if they contact the infection is deliberate, diligent control of all your risk factors. For a diabetic, please ensure your blood sugars are very good. Check your HbA1cs, check your fasting postprandial sugars. For hypertensive, keep your blood pressure below 135/85, ideally below 130/80. Renal failure patients, take your medications regularly. Those who have strokes, again, those who have any lung disease, absolutely no to smoking. Smokers should take this as biggest opportunity to just stop smoking, because any lung damage is only going to increase the way the virus affects you, and your reserves in case you get an infection of the lung are absolutely lost. So smoking is absolutely wrong. Check your cholesterol. Obesity, it not only causes more of heart disease, it prevents your breathing. or breathing suffers. So that needs to be really addressed well. All in all, a good healthy lifestyle is all that we can really advise, and would make a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Navreet. There's another question. Experts say it is important for those with cardiovascular disease to be isolated with people from people with COVID-19 symptoms in a hospital setting during their follow-ups, etc., and to remain current with vaccination for influenza and pneumonia. Is it true, sir? Will being current on vaccinations be of benefit for cardiac patients?
So, cardiac patients are always at risk, higher risk than the general population. Lung infections, pneumonias caused by the flu is a known complication. It was affecting heart disease patients and killing them in the past too. But the proportion was much less as compared to COVID. So, if COVID has a case fatality rate of about 8 to 9%, it was only just 0.1% in the other viruses. But it's still a number. I mean, 1 in 1,000 will still die. So, being current on vaccination for the flu, other known flus, other than 2 or 3 the 3 or 4 strains that we have in the past, should be done. You should continue on the vaccination for that, for also other illnesses, the pneumococcal vaccine, to prevent any chest infection, because any chest infection puts a much higher load on the heart, whether on the left heart or whether on the right heart, and can cause serious side. So I think serious complications. I think it should be absolutely mandatory to take these vaccines. So we are very sure that these vaccines don't really give us the protection against COVID. They do protect you against the other viruses, but we're quite sure that it doesn't give you a really significant benefit over others to protection for COVID itself.
Thank you, Colonel Navreet. There's a question from Professor Kam. She's asked that in hypertension, is it important to take blood thinners like Ecosprin, and should it be 75 or 150 mg? This is during, I think, related to COVID.
No. The only indication for blood thinners in the setting of COVID would be a high-risk patient who is COVID positive and is sick and is confined to bed. You need to give them blood thinners. That too, blood thinners which are the injectable blood thinners, which the heparin group of blood thinners, certainly not Ecosprin, unless of course you have associated coronary artery disease. That means you were either stented or you had other heart disease. It is only in that state that you would like to institute Ecosprin. But hypertensives, no. Just no. Just take your normal medications. Just take the normal antihypertensives. That's all. So nothing more. No Ecosprin required.
Thank you, Colonel Navreet. There's another question. The question is, any special precautions to be taken by diabetics during COVID? I think this has already been answered.
Yeah, I think you don't need to certainly step up if you're taking medicines to go on to insulin, but a good glycemic control, a good sugar control is absolutely mandatory. Absolutely. It not only prevents you from cardiac complications, but even if you get COVID, the other opportunistic infections which happen, that is, other bacterial pneumonias, other infections which can happen because you are a diabetic or on the ventilator or having catheters, will become much less if you are having a good glycemic, good sugar control. I think that it goes very naturally that you should be very, very particular in controlling of blood sugars, especially in this time.
Thank you, Colonel Navreet. There's one question. What kind of first aid we can give to a patient who is undergoing heart failure while taking him to the hospital?
Okay, that's a good question. I think if I were to take it in two settings, one is in an absolutely open setting wherein you have nothing which is there, and you have a patient, I wonder if they mean heart failure or heart attack. If it is heart failure, well, it's a different subset, but I suppose it may be more concerning a heart attack. The heart attack, probably just the first thing to be done is don't move the patient. Just make him sit down, calm him down. If you get some Ecosprin or blood thinner, give it to him. Just calm him down. Don't make him walk. Don't make him vomit per se. If you have some oxygen, you just prop him up in a chair and just shift him to hospital. But if you're saying heart failure, in which heart failure would mean that he's breathless and he's panting for breath, the most important would be to make him sit up straight. By making him sit up straight, you let the water in the lungs settle down into the lower part of the lungs, and the upper parts can then he can still breathe. The oxygenation of the blood can take place. If it's in a totally raw setting, you just prop him up. If you can get some oxygen, wonderful. But that would be probably it. Let him dangle his legs. Don't lift his legs, and then just take him to hospital. So that's in an absolutely raw setting in the field. But if you have some medications of his, and you have just heart failure, that means he's getting fluid in his body. You have, the drugs like Lasix and diuretics, which you have in his medicines. You could certainly give him an extra tablet or half a tablet of that more at that moment, so that he can flush out the fluid in his urine. That's for heart failure. But as I said, if he means heart attack, well, it's a different thing. You must give him blood thinners as fast as you can. Ecosprin, simple tablet, lying most of the time around here and there. Just give him one full tablet, ask him to just chew it or swallow it. It will save a significant number of people. It will save much part of the heart. Then big intervention like antiplastic. It's a wonder drug, actually.
Thank you, Colonel Navreet. There's a question from Kanchan Ji. Can diabetics continue with Ecosprin 75?
There was a lot of debate about this in recent studies done. But as of now, if you ask the guidelines, a diabetic should not be given a Ecosprin. He should be given atorvastatin to lower his cholesterol, but not Ecosprin without any heart disease. I mean, if he has heart disease, he certainly does deserve Ecosprin. If he has a stroke, brain stroke, he should be given Ecosprin. If he has some involvement of blood vessels of his legs, many people have pain on walking and their legs have obstruction, they should be given Ecosprin. But per se, if you're just a diabetic, 45 years, plain diabetes, sugars are well controlled, you don't have to give any Ecosprin.
Thank you, Colonel Navreet. There's one question I have. The question is, people undergoing dental treatment, especially during COVID time, do you think they should stop and who are heart patients, do you think they should stop their medications like blood thinners and then go for the treatment? Or is it, because that can be risky as well?
So, dental treatment guidelines are nearly the same as for other procedures, except that because they're more so for the dentist rather than the patient itself. And for the patient, absolutely to even if they are blood thinners, the propensity for bleeding is slightly higher if you're on blood thinner. But because you can see the blood loss and it is amenable to be stopped by local measures, you should not stop your blood thinners unless, of course, it is really mandatory and you're on 2 or 3 blood thinners and you expect a very significant blood loss. You can go off, but most guidelines say that try not to do it. It's more risky, especially if you're stented. If you're stents in your heart, we don't advise any change of blood pressure, any change of medication. And the guidelines remain exactly the same for patients during this pandemic. As I said, guidelines for the dentists are much more strict because the transmission can be much faster. You are so close to the patient's mouth and nose.
Thank you, Colonel Navreet. There's a question from Kanchan Jaina. She's written that do patients have to take atorvastatin even if the cholesterol isn't?
That's a great question. The patients with cholesterol has got various components, and one of the
should diabetic take atorva even if cholesterol isn't?
So diabetics per se have a higher proportion of the bad cholesterol. Even if the total cholesterol is normal or within the range, the proportion of the bad cholesterol, that is the one which causes the deposition and the break in the plaques of fat in the heart diseases, in the brain, heart vessels, in the brain vessels. So their cholesterol inherently is slightly bad than the normal person. So you tend to act on it and reduce it further. In that prospect, it is advised that diabetics take cholesterol lowering medications to lower their LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol levels, to levels which you would normally do for a heart patient without diabetes. So you can take that a diabetic is almost equivalent to a patient, a normal patient without diabetes, they're having heart disease. So we do suppress the cholesterol a little more, and it has shown to have much benefit in diabetes. We have good data to show that heart disease is better controlled in diabetics who are given these medications. So you should take, yes, I would prescribe.
There's one question which is coming to my mind. That is, we see a lot of advertisements where they say that if all heart patients, there's a good news, happy news, that your whole blood can be changed, or you'll be given one medicine and you have to stay in the hospital for 4 hours, and those are those Ayurvedic medicines or something, which change your, like clear your blockages. Is it actually there, or these are just like money-making gimmicks?
Not only money-making gimmicks, I think they are detrimental to the heart function, because they unnecessarily stimulate your heart circulation. You would feel some palpitations, some increase in heart rate, increasing the thump of the heart, which you may feel, oh, it's acting on my heart, it's really going to change things. But on ground, it's actually detrimental. These chelating agents, which are known, are really of no benefit and just not to be taken. They're not scientific and have just no scientific basis. As a patient of heart disease, and we see more and more of them go longer and longer into the history, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, they tend to become more and more complacent and more dependent on these various methods, because the society is so overbearing on their thought processes. But I think they should make a concerted effort that it should not affect their routine. If you're stented, you got to take blood thinners. If you're hypertensive, you should take blood pressure lowering medications. If you have cholesterol, you must lower your cholesterol. If you have some heart disease, take all these 3 drugs properly. You could add, various others, some nuts or whatever can be taken off shelf, but certainly not distillation. It's really damaging. It can even affect it can really hurt your kidney.
Thank you, Colonel Naveen. There is one question that if diabetics get pain in their legs, so what is your advice regarding taking EcoSprint?
Well, if I have just a straight question, yes, I would. If somebody told me that I'm a diabetic and when I walk up the stairs after 10-15 minutes of walk on level ground, I start to develop pain in my calves and my thighs. Well, there is some narrowing of blood vessels of the leg, which is common in diabetics. More so in diabetics who smoke. More so in diabetics who smoke and have low cholesterol. So in that subset, without doing too many tests, angiographies, I would certainly start him on a blood thinner like EcoSprint in the OPD itself, and then go on to start to do other investigations to check where the blockage is, how can it be opened. But if a diabetic comes to me and says, yes, I have pain in my legs while I walk, and otherwise when I stop, it goes away, it is a marker that there is some narrowing of blood vessels. I would start EcoSprint, yes, on the first visit itself.
Thank you, Colonel Navreet. There's another question. Can you please give some suggestions on healthy heart and mind techniques for all, including patients with cardiac complications?
Healthy heart and mind. Oh my. I think the most important among those would be a good sleep. I think sleep is a very essential component of day-to-day healthy living. Especially, it rests the heart, it brings down pressures. So that would be one of my main focuses. If somebody asks me one major point, good sleep is very essential for a healthy heart. By way of you're asking mentally, stresses do cause cardiac symptoms. They raise the blood pressure. They can cause they can precipitate heart failure. They can precipitate heart attacks, but not so much as the long-term benefits of good mental health, wherein I would say a stress-free living and ensuring a very good sleep. That's probably very essential. Medications for this, we do prescribe medicines. But by and large, if you have a regular lifestyle wherein by and large you eat well, you exercise a little bit, I don't think you require medications to induce sleep. Do a good exercise, I think that will bring about a very significant change in your and the heart-mind connect is very, very sacred. I mean, we know it from all the grunts that we've written, that it's such an important connect. I think a good healthy mind would certainly be of benefit to the heart.
There's one question. If there is no pain in walking but on lying for a diabetic, does that also indicate narrowing of blood vessels?
No. When you walk, you increase your blood flow requirement to the legs, and if the blood vessels are narrow, it can't supply. So we call claudication. The word for it is claudication. You can Google it and see. Claudication is a marker of narrowed blood vessels. It would happen on exertion. If you have pain just on lying down, well, it's a more involvement of the nerves, not the blood vessel. So in a diabetic especially, if you're concerned with a diabetic, then you need to consult a neurophysician to check the conduction of the nerves and how good your sugar control is, or if the nerve, damaged by the blood sugar. If you just have pain on lying down, especially burning of your feet, or just pain in your legs, numbness in your lower legs, or then more of a neurological disease than a vascular disease, and that the blood vessels are not so involved rather than when the nerves are involved. So, as I said, to summarize, exertional pain, pain on walking, your blood vessels are improved, you need to take ecosprin. If you don't have that and it's just occasionally on lying down, especially of your feet, then more likely a nerve involved.
Thank you so much. Are diabetics at risk of getting cardiac disease? If yes, why?
Well, 1960s they didn't think so, but over the last few decades they are very sure now that diabetics are certainly at increased risk of having heart disease. Not only risk of having heart disease, they have much more severe heart disease. Not only do they have more severe heart disease, if you treat it, they fare worse than the normal patients with heart disease. So every which way, a diabetic is much worse off than a non-diabetic patient. Why this happens? Diabetes is not increased blood sugar. Blood sugar is just one of the components, and it has so many other small compounds associated with it, which cause slow, steady damage to blood vessels, to the kidneys, to the heart, to the brain, to the eyes. If I would say, it's a democracy. It is something like that. So we need to be very good in our diabetic control, because good sugar control, these other metabolites are less produced, they less damage your other organs, including, as I said, the heart is one, we know about it, but the brain. Diabetics have a higher proportion of getting strokes, brain strokes. Diabetics are known to have much higher proportion of having kidney disease. So all these systems will improve if you have a good sugar control. And why this happens, as I said, because sugar is just one manifestation of this disease process, and it's so many compounds which are produced with this can go and affect the organs at the very cellular level, at the cell level, at the tissue level, at the organ level.
Thank you, Colonel Navreet. Are there any more questions, or we should wind up? I have one last question. The question is, there is one case of COVID which has come in Chandigarh, and that case is of a newborn child who was just born 3 days back. The child has COVID-19. So what do you think are the chances of his survival, or maybe comes out of it? What do you think are the special precautions which need to be taken?
Well, I've yet to read a report where there is transmission from the mother to the child to the womb of COVID. Not yet read about it.
Here, I would like to mention the mother is not a corona carrier. No, she's not infected. She's not a positive case.
So I think most likely the child has contacted the infection from one of the healthcare providers who was delivering the baby, or who was around, or one of the relations who came to see the child. How much would be the risk? Well, hard to say, but certainly less than the high risk group. So I won't say that they're likely to lose the baby. I think on most occasions he should improve. The baby should get well. Having said that, we've seen a few infant deaths in the military hospital, but far and few. I think they should be very optimistic about the child getting well.
There are two more questions which have come up. Do diabetics and Parkinson's have any relationship?
Diabetics with Parkinsonism. Well, Parkinsonism is a neurological disease with a different cause than diabetes. But because, as I said, diabetes does affect multi-systems and it does involve the nervous system. It could involve the nerves, majorly the nerves, and also a little bit of the other muscles and the nerves. But if you ask me directly, if Parkinsonism and diabetes are related, well, little in common. But if they are both there, it does portend a worse prognosis for that individual, because Parkinsonism prevents movement or the slowness of movement, can cause some amount of infection in the lungs because you can't swallow well, and diabetics are more prone to infections, so they're likely to get more of the infections, whether of the lungs, we call it aspiration pneumonia. Yes, the complications of Parkinsonism will be worsened by diabetes, for sure, but per se, diabetes won't increase Parkinsonism.
There's a question, Colonel Lavreet. Are cardiac complications a manifestation of psychological distress, especially in a time frame that we are in?
Well, yes, for sure, that the stresses of life do increase the number of cardiac events. We know for sure that increases coronary artery disease, that is heart disease. Good studies done on this on Indian populations. So we have enough data to suggest that good mental health will prevent heart disease. But at the same time, it is not such an essential component as the other parts, and there is other risk factors. That's smoking. I would keep it as just number one, far ahead of everything else. Diabetics, hypertensive, kidney failure, and people with increased cholesterol. But good mental health would certainly go a long way in preventing heart attacks. Heart failure, well, not so much so. It does cause a little effect, but it is not so detrimental. But yes, heart attacks, which is one of the immediate and rapid causes of death, if we know of heart disease, good mental health will certainly prevent it. And as I said, there are good studies from India which show that good mental health does reduce.
Thank you, Colonel Lavreet. Actually, this is the last question. Since the Center for Social Work has organized this lecture, and we have a lot of social work students from and research scholars who are there from the department. So there is one question which I would like to address here is that in a cardiac center or as a cardiac interventionist, what do you think are the ethical dilemmas you face or you have been facing, and the role of a social worker in a cardiac unit?
I think the major...
A student who's been trained in a school of social work, what role can you play, and what are the ethical dilemmas you face being an interventional cardiologist?
I think the major ethical dilemma for an intervention cardiologist is how much do you think, by way of the science, by way of the experience, should you intervene to probably try to save a life? because your resources are restricted, your resources are limited. So that always comes on to play in your mind, whether should I stent a 90-year-old patient? Should I, send a 70-year-old patient for heart transplant? All those dilemmas, that patient is precious to that family, but do you think that we can economically in this country or in that social environment be able to handle it? I am in a government center where resources are much better streamlined. But I did my cardiology from All India Institute, where you would be very, very selective in telling patients whether they require stents if you knew that if you could do without it, with a little bit of risk, because it would entail them selling their land or selling their shop or selling their ready and livelihood just because the doctor said so. So those are ethical issues which keep creeping onto your mind, that this high-end tertiary care, how much, and there comes the role of the social worker, which is so immense, which is so essential, and we have very little, I would say, interaction with the social fabric as intervention cardiologists. I won't say because we don't have time, but because we don't have the aptitude and the capacity to actually sit with them and talk with them, because if they bring about a change in the lifestyle, they bring a change in the nutritional state, in basic drugs, basic ways of good healthy living right at the grassroots level, we will see that this epidemic of cardiac illnesses is markedly reversed. We don't have, and I can very candidly say, we brush off this part of education to the family, to the person himself reading about it, and the social worker can be very, very influential in this. Just to say stop smoking. So many of my patients are smokers and they know it's wrong, but if somebody goes down and tells them every second day that I don't think they're doing the correct thing, probably they'll stop smoking. Diabetics. So many diabetics don't take their medication just because nobody reiterates it to them. I reiterate to my patient once in 1 month or once in 6 months. While I would expect a social worker to tell them about healthy living every second, third day. And that education at their house, at their basic level, is far more effective, is far more effective. And the validation of that will be absolutely immense. I think there's a very major need for the social worker to, and see if they are doing it from good institutions, they should interact with the tertiary healthcare providers as to what they can do. And it will certainly bring a major change. May not bring it immediately, may not be in 1 year or 6 months, but by the time they are 20, 25 years of service, they'll see that they have significantly reduced morbidity and mortality in the environment in which they are practicing. The social worker is a wonderful tool, very little utilized.
Okay, thank you so much, Colonel Navri. It's been a wonderful lecture, and we've had such an elaborative session, and I'm sure everyone has really benefited from this talk and session today. And I really thank you from my heart that you have taken out time from your really busy schedule, and we benefited from your lecture and your interactive session, and whatever queries were there, they have been answered, and a lot of people had so many doubts which have been cleared by you. And it is really a matter of honor and pride for the Center for Social Work at Punjab University to have you as such a distinguished speaker amongst us. You could spare time, and I'm really thankful to all the participants who've been with us and putting up queries. Professor Jaspal Khan, who's taken out time to be with us throughout the lecture. Dr. Manoj Kumar Teotia. Then we have Mr. Wagmare, Professor Wagmare from Maharashtra. Then there is Mamta Sharma ma'am. Then all my students of social work, research scholars of social work, and all the students of IGNOU who are there. So if I have left out anybody, and I would like to especially thank Avtar Singh Cheema ji in these webinars taking place, because he's been doing all the technical, he's giving all the technical help. So thank you once again. I, on behalf of the Center for Social Work, Punjab University, and all the faculty of Social Work Department and Punjab University would like to thank you for this wonderful session and lecture and taking out time. Stay safe, stay blessed. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dr. Malika.
Real honor, ma'am. Thank you so much, and wonderful interaction. So kind of you to have invited me.
It's been really nice. There's one Professor Kanchan Jain who's been asking most of the questions. She's from Statistics Department. I knew she's from Stat, but I was not very clear. So, ma'am, you've been very nice, and I'm sure your queries have been cleared. So, thank you, ma'am, for attending this lecture. And also, Mr. Ratan, T.K. Ratanji, I thought he would put up some questions since he's a liver transplant.